Welcome to the Women's Connection. I'm Barrie-Louise Switzen, your moderator. The Women's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives and helping one gain authentic power on a personal or professional level. So won't you stay tuned?
Welcome. One of my favorite television shows of all times was The Golden Girls. The women were fantastic, and it was giving you an idea of what being a senior was like, but living in a communal house. And with me is Bonnie Moore, who has created the Golden Girls Network. And I would like to welcome Bonnie. Bonnie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I am so excited. Let's start with, how did you come up with the Golden Girls Network, and what exactly is it?
The Golden Girls Network is a way, it's a networking process where seniors or any woman over 40 who wants to live in shared housing can connect with other people and find a place to live. And the way I came up with it, it just sort of happened because my husband and I bought an older house and we remodeled it, and then we split up, and I had this gorgeous house, 5-bedroom house, and I didn't want to lose it, so I decided to get roommates.
You had said something about the financial aspects.
Yes.
Please elaborate a little bit more, because I think this comes into play with women who are getting a divorce or separating. What happened?
Well, we had this house and we put all this remodeling into it, and the value went up very nicely, and then the recession hit. And so we had put $350,000 into this house, and then it plummeted in value, and basically I lost all that money, but I had this gorgeous house and I wanted to keep it. So my choice was I could walk away from it and let somebody else get all my wonderful remodeling, or I could try to keep it. And so I decided to try to keep it, and that's when I started looking for roommates.
Looking for roommates. Here in New York, it's a delicate dance, because especially if you're younger, everybody's wild and crazy. Of course, then seniors can also be wild and crazy. But what do you, I'm not sure where you start. Do you start with networking to see that you've got people who are interested? Do you put an ad in Craigslist? What do you do?
Well, that was a challenge for me because, yes, I started in Craigslist, but there were so many people that weren't the type of person I was looking for. And that's how I ended up developing my own website. So the people who sign up with Golden Girls Network are all people who are looking for this kind of lifestyle. They're in the age group, and they're interested. We already know that they're interested because they have signed up. And so the Golden Girls Network is simply people who have homes and people who want to live in homes, and they can search for each other just like Match.com. And so you're starting out on the right foot because you're starting with somebody who is in your age group and who is interested in the lifestyle.
You start out, you put an ad, not an ad, but you have your network.
Yes.
Do you click on and see who you want? Do you have a party to interview them? What's the next step?
Well, when you register, you can put up pictures. A picture of yourself, a picture of your house, and you fill out whether or not you have pets, whether or not you're interested in taking pets, smoking, non-smoking. You describe your house a little bit. So you fill out a profile. And women who, and we allow men also, but it's mostly women. Women who register as roommates fill out a profile. And so when I'm searching, let's say I have a room that's available, I'm searching the women who have registered as roommates, and I can see their picture, and I can see their profile information. And if it looks like someone that is interested in living in my area, and it looks like she has some of the basic attributes, I can send her an email and say, are you still looking? And she'll write back to me, and then we communicate, and we might talk by phone, and then I'll have her come over for an interview.
This sounds almost like a dance with a date. But what about fair housing laws? Let's start there before we continue, because How does that play into it?
Technically, when you are sharing housing, you don't have some of the same restrictions as when you're renting an apartment. Now, because if you're sharing space, sharing a bathroom, sharing a kitchen, you can make decisions about, well, I want an older person, I want a woman, those types of things, because you are sharing. You're not restricted to taking anybody who comes along. In my book, though, I talk about this and I say, well, there are some things that you really should follow anyway. Don't discriminate against somebody because of color or religion or ethnic background or whatever. Don't use that as a criteria, but there are other things that you can use as a criteria. Sometimes a person has interests, or there's something about that person that you know is not going to fit well in your house. And so you can make a decision based upon that. But you want to make a decision based upon something realistic and not something that's just discriminatory.
Do you ever go by a gut instinct?
Always.
Has it ever failed you?
Yes.
So what do you do? I mean, I know I'm jumping ahead, but what do you do in that case?
Sometimes it doesn't work out, right. And that's one of the first questions that people always ask me, because they're concerned about getting into a situation that doesn't work out. And I've had some of those. And if I'm not happy, the other person is not happy, and they're uncomfortable living there. And most of the time, the person who's uncomfortable, the roommate, will decide to move out, simply because it's not working for her. There have been situations where I was uncomfortable, and at the end of a person's lease, I simply told them I was not going to renew their lease. I've had a couple of bad situations where I've simply asked a person to leave. You have to give them 30 days notice, so everybody's uncomfortable for 30 days, but we're all mature, we can get through that. And they always leave. I've never had to evict anyone. I've been doing this for 8 years now, and I've had people come and go, and I've had some good ones and some bad ones, and I've got a great group now. I've learned a lot in the process, and that's how I ended up writing my book.
Right, you wrote the book
How to Start a Golden Girls Home.
This is fantastic. It's got all kinds of information, checklists, and so forth. All right, let's start at the beginning. How did you figure out how much to charge a tenant? I don't know if you talked a tenant, a renter.
I call them housemates.
Housemates, okay.
It's market. You need to look in Craigslist or however people advertise in your community and get a sense of what you're competing with. I always suggest to people that you include the utilities in the rent. You don't want to be arguing about utilities. Add $50 on for the utilities. So you can make it a little bit higher, but in most roommate rental situations, the utilities are included. But you have to look and see what the market rate is. I've talked to some women who have said, well, let me see, I need this much money to cover this and this and this. And I say, no, that's not how you set your rent. You have to see what other people in the neighborhood are charging or in your community are charging. You have to look at and see what you have available. If I have a large room with a private bath on the main floor, I'm going to get a lot more rent than a small room with a shared bath on the second floor.
Makes sense.
So you set your rents according to what you have, and if you advertise it and you don't find somebody within 2 or 3 months, you know that you might be charging too much. So you might try lowering it.
When you say utilities that are included, does that mean gas, water, cable, phone?
Gas, water, cable. Now, I provide the basic cable. In my house, people want the extra channels, and so everybody pays an extra $15 towards the extra channels. It actually also includes the cleaning lady that comes every 2 weeks, and the yard guy who comes and mows the lawn, because I can't do without them.
There's all these little things that you have to think about. All right, so you interview a woman or a man, but how do you know if it's going to be a good fit? I know you go by your intuition, you go by the questionnaire. Do you have anybody say, no, this is not going to work for me?
I've had some people realize that it wasn't the right situation for them. I'm actually thinking of a woman who came about a year or so ago, and she was a very quiet, introverted person. And I'm not necessarily quiet and introverted. And I like having company, and I like having a dinner party, and I like having people's grandchildren stop by and things like that. And with 5 people in the house, I think this woman realized that it might be too noisy for her. And she just realized that it wasn't quite the right fit for her. I had another woman come one time, and she seemed very positive, and she seemed like she would fit in, and she moved in, and the first day she moved in, she was extremely negative. And she was there for 3 months. Now, she started being negative from the day she moved in, and we kind of got tired of it. And we started avoiding her. And she didn't like that. She wanted someone to complain to. And so after 3 months, she came to me and she says, you know, this just isn't working for me. I'm moving. And I said, okay, you know, it happens. She was someone who was having a difficult time living. She had moved a number of times, and it was really something about her, not my situation, and I recognize that. In my house, we need to be positive. We need to be positive in terms of getting along with each other, and that works best.
It's okay, because anybody who's negative, I just eliminate them. I don't have time for that.
That's right.
What kind of legal documents do you require or have or suggest to be put into place?
I always suggest a 1-year lease. And in the book, I actually have a sample of a 1-year, the lease that I use. And there's 2 reasons. First of all, if you tell people a lease is required, you're going to get a different type of person. In the beginning when I started, and let me sidetrack, most of the stories in the book and most of the recommendations in the book come from my bad stories. But in the beginning, I asked for a 6-month lease. And I got people that would move in and move out, and move in and move out, and it's like it was a revolving door, and that wasn't what I was looking for. And because they were short term, they really didn't put the energy into having a group living situation. So then I switched to a 1-year lease, and I found a different type of person. I found people who were interested in staying and kind of growing old together. And so that's what I have now. And the lease is good because you're putting things in writing. You're putting your expectations in writing. The other thing that I recommend to people, and everything is a recommendation, I recommend written house agreements. And so I've got a suggestion in the book. And the house agreements are really little details. This is the way we do things in our house. This is how I handle recycling. Here's what the expectations are in terms of cleaning. Things like that. Overnight guests.
I'm glad you bring that up, because I have a... How do you handle overnight guests?
The owner of the house can handle it any way she wants. Some women are comfortable with it and some women are not, but the homeowner gets to make the choice. In my house, I allow overnight guests. I've had some who wore out their welcome, and I've had to say to the roommate, I think he's worn out his welcome, and so he didn't show up anymore. We had another situation where the roommate and the boyfriend got into fights, and we said, no, we're not having that. I've recently had a roommate who wanted her boyfriend to stay over a couple of days, and another roommate says, "Oh, I'm not comfortable with that." And I said, "It's in the house agreements." So that's why house agreements are valuable. You get to write down what your expectations are and what your rules are, and you can make it whatever you want. So my house agreements basically came out of situations that did not work, and so when it didn't work, I went to the computer and wrote a rule that would clean it up and put it in the house agreements for the next time.
With the, I was going to say unwanted, but sometimes it is wanted or unwanted depending on the who's the guest. Do you have grandchildren stay too? Because when you think of guests staying overnight, you think of let's say a lover. What about grandchildren or children staying? Does that apply the same way?
Well, yes and no. My grandkids came last summer. I took them on a trip, but they were actually at the house for 2 or 3 days, and they were 11 years old last year, twins, 2 of them, and they're coming again this summer, and everybody loves them. They walk in and hug my roommates, and my grandkids are well behaved. Now, one time a woman had 3 of her grandchildren, and they actually stayed for a week, and it got to be too much, and I had to talk to her about that. But grandchildren are welcome. There was a woman who was recently divorced, and she had a daughter in college, and the daughter would come down and stay with us during school vacations, and we loved her. We adopted her. We called her our adopted child. So there's enough room. The grandchildren, the children usually stay with the mother in her bedroom, and it just works. So I like having lots of people around, and so I welcome everybody's children and grandchildren.
Now, people are aging. Nobody stands still. How do you handle people's, okay, let's start with the kitchen and the foods for health reasons or the health issues. How does that get handled?
We have found that for the most part we all buy our own food because we have different styles of eating, and we eat at different times. And the 5 women in my house are so busy that often we're not eating at home, and so you can't plan any meal. We try to plan a sit-down dinner together once a month. And we really have to work hard to find a day when everybody's going to be there. Now, last weekend, we actually had a picnic, and we invited a bunch of people, but we had to plan that for a month. So we all buy our own food. And some people eat very healthy and others don't, but you do your own thing.
So there's no real, in your house particularly, there's no real issue. Now, what about people's health? I mean, sometimes you have to go through surgery. Are you like a group of caregivers? How does that get handled?
Well, and that's actually interesting. Now, the women in my house have been primarily in their 50s for the most part. I had a couple of younger people. That did not turn out very well. But there was a woman who was in her 50s who was actually not taking very good care of herself. And there was one point she made a comment to one of the roommates, and the roommate realized she was actually sick. She took her to the emergency room. She says, "Come with me." Took her to the emergency room. She was put in the hospital for 5 days.
Wow.
Because she was just plain not taking care of herself, not eating well. She was depressed. And so we made sure that she had a visitor every day. We brought her back. We kind of monitored her and made sure that she was doing okay. Then there's me. I'm diabetic, and I don't often take care of myself. And there was one time they had to call an ambulance to come and get me and take me to the hospital. So I've been hospitalized 2 or 3 times in the last 8 years. And they come and visit me. I have, and they bring me things and they take me home, and you know, my friends all know that every once in a while I need a hospital visit.
Well, how do you handle health care issues? I mean, like, if, I don't know, a health care proxy, do these people have that kind of a situation with you? Do they want that situation to have a healthcare proxy? And do you want a healthcare proxy on your roommates? Who's responsible in this whole situation?
We actually haven't addressed that because for the most part, we're pretty healthy. We haven't reached the point yet where we really have to address that type of a thing. My sense is that if I were to get old enough, and I'm the oldest one in the house, if I were to get old enough where I needed some health care, I would go to one of these home health care agencies and have somebody come in and take care of me and do what needed to be done. I would not be dependent on my roommates because there are laws that in order to provide personal care, you have to have a license, and so we don't have that. We're there to be roommates and to be companions and to help with the housework, but nobody. Well, actually, I do have one person who's a retired nurse, but we're not there to take care of each other. But if somebody needed care, we would figure something out because we do look out for each other.
What if somebody dies during the middle of the night?
Oh.
Okay.
Haven't dealt with that one yet.
All right. And they don't have a will.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know that if you don't have a will and you die in your home, and, it's kind of like strange that the sheriff will come and lock up the apartment and you can't get in, and it's a whole mess.
Interesting.
You have to go through probate. I mean, I'm not telling it in the right order, but you just can't walk into the apartment when somebody passes away, whether they have a will or they don't have a will. How does that work in your situation?
I haven't addressed that. Now, when people come as roommates, I do have them fill out a form, and I get the name and phone number of their next of kin. If something serious happened, the first thing I would do is call their next of kin, and we would make an arrangement. And we haven't yet addressed what would happen if I died. Now, my son would probably work something out with them, but the house would have to be sold and this and that, but I haven't addressed that yet. I know that there are some people who make these kind of arrangements, when 2 or 3 people who are not related buy a house together, they actually work all of that out in their agreements. And so that is something that I'm going to have to address one of these days when I decide I'm old. Values of having a roommate is, as you age, you've got somebody who's watching out for you and you're watching out for them. And so there is a safety thing there. What happens when somebody dies, I haven't quite addressed yet. But the idea of having a roommate as you age in place is that you do have that companionship. And you do have somebody watching out for you, making sure that you're okay. They're making sure that you're okay too, so it's a balance type of thing. And we are going to have to figure out some guidelines for when something bad goes wrong. I haven't addressed that yet. We're only a year old, and so most of the people are still pretty healthy.
Bonnie, let's go back to the kitchen.
Sure.
Everybody in your household is on a different schedule.
Yes.
So you really don't see each other. But if you're on the same schedule, how do you handle, I want this, I want that, I want the stove, you're in my way? How does it get handled?
Well, the kitchen is big enough that 2 people can actually be cooking at the same time. The bigger issue is cleaning up. In the beginning, I had people who says, well, I didn't leave that spoon, and that's not my dirty dish. And it just didn't work. And so I finally came up with a plan that works, and it's been going very well for about 3 or 4 years now, and that is we have chores. We take turns, and all you do for chores, if you're on chores for that week, is at night before you go to bed, you make sure that all the dishes are in the dishwasher, and you turn the dishwasher on. You wipe the sink and you wipe the stove, and you make sure that the trash gets put out. And then on Sunday night, you have to take the trash to the curb. And that's all there is to chores. But at least that gets done. And nobody is complaining because, oh, that's not my spoon, or I didn't leave that grease on the stove, or you just do it. So sometimes you're picking up after somebody, yeah, and I'm the messiest one in the house. And I actually tell people when they come to interview, I'm not the cleanest person in the world. I'll leave dishes in the sink for a few hours. I'll leave a wine glass on the coffee table. Don't fuss about that stuff. That's the way I live. I'm not dirty, and I'm not sloppy, but I'm not going to pick up instantly every time I do something. And I've had roommates where that bothered them. So I let people know ahead of time, this is just the way I am. I'm not going to worry about it. I'll leave my shoes out. I'll leave something here. I'll leave something there. Don't worry about it. And so we have this thing in the kitchen where it gets cleaned every night. So all those people who are real fussy about the kitchen, they can clean it. And that has worked very well. And so we're mature enough that we don't fuss about who left what. We just clean up because we know somebody else is going to clean up after us.
Now, what if you like pets, somebody else doesn't like pets? How do you handle that?
Oh, I'm glad you asked about pets because that was a problem. I don't have pets. I had pets when my kids were growing up, and I have had enough of taking care of pets. So, but I sort of accidentally acquired some pets with roommates. It wasn't planned that way. It just sort of happened. And so then this woman had a dog, and this woman had a dog, and somebody came along, and she says, oh, I see dogs are loud. She went down to the pound and got a dog. Then somebody else came along with a dog. And so I had 4 dogs in the house at one time, and it was too much for me. But they started moving. And when the last dog moved out, I said, no more pets.
What kind of interview questions do you ask the potential roommate?
One of the first questions that I suggest, I have a whole chapter on interview questions. The first question is, why are you moving?
Very good.
Because sometimes somebody is moving because they don't get along with the previous landlord, or they don't get along with the previous roommate. So that's a good question to kind of crack things open. Why are you moving? And if somebody is downsizing, very legitimate situation. Many of these answers are very legitimate. Downsizing, or a relationship is breaking up, somebody's getting divorced. The most common situation for women moving in with me is they are recently divorced and they're starting all over again. And they don't have the furniture, they don't have the house, they're trying to figure out what to do next. And so this is a perfect situation for somebody like that.
Do you ever do background checks on any of the potential roommates?
I don't, but we are actually in the process of setting up a contract with a company that does background checks because many people want to do that. I had one situation where I wish I had done a background check. The woman did not tell me the truth, and I found out later, and you know, she ended up being a problem, and I ended up asking her to leave, but that was the only situation. I've never had anyone who was really dishonest or...
Wait a minute, you said really dishonest? What do you mean by really versus being dishonest?
Oh, well, small dishonesty might be, you know, you tell them I'm not here, you know. Seriously dishonest would be somebody who tells me she's working and she's not. Somebody who tells me, now this particular woman had bad credit and she didn't want me to check her credit, and so she told me that she was living with somebody and he had hit her and she was in a domestic violence situation. She really needed to get out quickly. And so I fell for it and very quickly arranged for her to move in. Well, it wasn't the truth. She told me that story so that I wouldn't check her out and I would be sympathetic. So that was the one situation that I probably should have checked. I know that some of the women moving in with me have bad credit. They tell me that. They're coming out of a bad situation. They're trying to rebuild their lives. And I don't hold that against them, but they do need to be employed and you know, have a steady income.
Well, when you say be employed, do you ask for a letter of employment from their employer, and how long, and basically how much, to know that they'd be able to make the maintenance? Or the rent in this case?
I don't actually ask for that. I do ask them where they are employed and something about their salary and those kinds of things. When we get this background check process set up, we'll be able to get that kind of information. But starting out, no, I didn't ask those questions. I'm learning that I should ask more of those questions.
All right, you've got this great network located here. What are your future plans for expansion?
Well, one of the things I found is we need to do the national marketing and get the national media attention that we're getting, and people need to hear about us so that we have credibility. But we also need to be local. People need to be able to ask questions of somebody on the ground. And so I'm setting up what I call regional directors. I have somebody in Orlando right now, and she's doing a fantastic job. She's been doing it for 2 months now. And I'm going to be setting up regional directors in different parts of the country where they can make a lot of the contacts, the local contacts, and make presentations and talk to people and answer their questions and sometimes teach them. There's also a course that we teach based upon the book. So we need both. So we're going to be expanding around the United States. We already have people registered in 45 states. I've also been contacted by people from other countries who want to be affiliated with us. They want to use my network and they want to use my name, and so I'm starting that conversation. Is rather exciting to feel like we're going to be in Canada one of these days soon, and over here and over there. And it's like this need is so big. It's so monumental. There are so many single adults, particularly women, who are struggling financially and who also start feeling lonely as they age. And those are the two things that Golden Girls Network really addresses, is the financial aspect and the loneliness aspect.
Do you find that there's a great need for from men?
The need is probably there. We do let men register.
Okay.
Some women would like to have a man roommate. They feel more secure if there's a man in the house, and so I have no problem with doing that. Some men don't socialize as much as women do. This works well for women because women just naturally are more social, and they're more, they form friendships and they're girlfriends, where men don't have that quite as much.
Bonnie, in the closing moments of the show, what would you like to leave the audience with?
Living with somebody as a roommate is fun. One of the nicest things is when I come home and I walk in the house and somebody says, "Hey, how was your day?" Or we gather in the kitchen and we drink coffee and just talk. That's the nicest part about this, is there's warmth in my house. There are people in my house. There's energy in my house, and I love that. I love having that in my house, even though my kids are grown up and the grandkids are on the other side of the country. And it's so nice to have that, and to know that I'm going to age in place in my own house with roommates.
Thank you so much for joining me. This is very interesting about what you have to do and shouldn't do in finding a roommate. Do you need a roommate, or would you like a roommate? Let us know. Please write us here at The Woman's Connection. Love to hear from you. Bye now.